The glow of the phone was the only real light in the room. It cast long, distorted shadows from the pizza box on the coffee table and the pile of mail I hadn't opened. Outside, the city hummed its endless, low-frequency song. Inside, the TV mumbled about a new detergent, the voices of the actors flat and distant. My thumb jabbed at the screen, tapping out a reply to some idiot on a forum. He didn't know anything. He was just a name, a string of characters. But the anger felt hot and real in my chest. Another jab. Send. The comment sat there, ugly and pointless. Then, I heard it. A sound that didn't belong. A quick, two-note giggle, like a child trying to suppress a laugh. It was thin, almost lost in the noise from the TV speaker. It sounded close. Too close. My thumb froze over the screen. I tilted my head, listening past the cheerful woman talking about brighter whites. Nothing. The hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. The faint rush of traffic from the street below. I pointed the remote at the TV and pressed the volume down button. The detergent ad faded away, leaving a hiss. Silence. The kind of silence that makes you aware of your own breathing. I listened. Waited. Nothing. "Goddamn neighbor's kid," I muttered. The sound scraped my throat. I cleared it. It was late. Way too late for a kid to be running the halls. I shook my head, dismissing it. The phone in my hand felt heavy. The anger from the online argument had evaporated, leaving something else. A residue. I went back to scrolling, my thumb moving mechanically down the feed, but I wasn't reading the words anymore. My throat was dry. I pushed myself off the couch, the cushions groaning in protest. The floorboards were cool under my bare feet as I walked to the kitchen. I didn't turn on the light. I knew the path. 3 steps to the counter, a turn, the refrigerator handle. I pulled it open, and the sudden, sterile light made me squint. I grabbed a bottle of water, twisted the cap, and drank half of it down in long, cold gulps. The water felt good. It was simple, real. I closed the fridge door, plunging the kitchen back into darkness. I walked back to the living room. The phone's screen had gone dark, a black mirror on the couch cushion. But my eyes weren't on the phone. They were on the floor. In the center of the small, worn, oriental rug, right where my feet had been moments ago, sat a single marble. It wasn't just any marble. It was teal, a deep ocean green, with a milky white swirl trapped inside it, like a frozen galaxy. A tiny chip near its north pole caught the faint light from the window. I felt the air leave my lungs in a slow, controlled stream. I knew that chip. I had caused it, a lifetime ago, on a cracked sidewalk. It was Andy's favorite, the prize marble. My first thought was a clean, sharp denial. No, it wasn't possible. I had boxed up every single thing that belonged to him, to us, years ago. The comic books, the action figures, the whole heavy bag of marbles. I drove the box to the county dump myself. I watched the man in the orange vest toss it into the compactor. I heard the crunch. I took a step closer. It was real, solid. It wasn't a memory or a trick of the light. It was a physical object that had not been there 3 minutes ago. The irritation from the kid's laugh was gone. This was different. This was a cold wire tightening in my gut. My head snapped up. I scanned the room, my eyes moving from the locked front door to the chained window. The chain was secure. The deadbolt was thrown. I'd locked it when I came home from work. I always did. My gaze swept the corners of the room, the dark space behind the worn armchair, the narrow hallway leading to the bedroom. I saw nothing but familiar shapes. Still, the feeling was there. The feeling of a question mark hanging in the air. A presence. I backed away from the marble, my bare feet silent on the wood floor. I didn't want to touch it. I didn't even want to look at it. I sat down on the far end of the couch, as far from it as I could get, and stared at the dark TV screen, watching my own faint reflection. My laptop sat on the other end of the coffee table, closed. I hadn't touched it since getting home. As I watched my reflection, a light bloomed from the seam of the closed device. It wasn't the small, pulsing sleep light. The entire screen lit up, casting a pale blue-gray glow against the lid. The laptop lid began to rise. It moved slowly, smoothly, without a sound. It was not the jerky motion of a loose hinge giving way. It was a deliberate, controlled ascent, like an unseen hand was lifting it. It stopped when it was fully open, facing me. My heart was a fist, hammering against the inside of my ribs. A series of clicks sounded from the speakers. The desktop appeared, then vanished. A window opened, showing a list of folders. Photos_2004. Photos_2005. Summer_trip. The cursor, a white arrow against the blue, was alive. It moved to the folder labeled Summer_trip, and a double-click sound echoed in the quiet room. The folder opened, revealing a grid of thumbnail images. Sunny days, blurry landscapes, group shots from a time I tried to forget. What the? A virus? The question was a puff of air. It felt stupid as soon as I said it. The cursor slid across the screen, moving with that same unnatural smoothness. It hovered over a specific photo, one of me and Andy at the lake. We were maybe 10 years old. Grinning, I had a missing front tooth. Andy's arm was slung over my shoulder. The thumbnail expanded, filling the screen. Our young faces, frozen in time. Happy. My hand darted out to grab the trackpad, to stop it, to close it, but the cursor began to move again before my fingers could touch the machine. It selected the drawing tool from the photo viewer's menu. A small, red circle appeared. The cursor dragged the red circle over Andy's face, drawing a slow, perfect loop around his smile. Stop it. My voice was a low growl. I lunged for the physical mouse I kept plugged in beside the laptop. I seized it, the plastic cool and solid in my hand. I tried to move the cursor. Nothing. It was dead. The red circle on the screen completed its loop, encasing Andy's face in a crimson ring. I slammed the mouse down on the table. It made a loud clatter. I jabbed my finger at the power button on the keyboard. I pressed it, held it down. The screen stayed on. The image remained. The red circle seemed to pulse, a drop of blood on a memory. The feeling of being watched was no longer a question. It was a certainty. It was a weight pressing down on my shoulders, a cold breath on the back of my neck. Then the screen went black. Not a powered-down black. A deep, absolute black. The power light on the keyboard was still on. I held my breath. The silence in the room was immense. It was a physical pressure against my eardrums. I could hear the blood roaring in my head. A second passed. 2. 3. White letters began to appear in the center of the dark screen. They were typed out, one at a time, with a faint, artificial clicking sound. "D, backquote, backquote O, backquote, backquote Y, backquote, backquote O, backquote, backquote U, backquote, backquote M, backquote, backquote I, backquote, backquote S, backquote, backquote S, backquote, backquote M, backquote, backquote E, backquote, 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 backquote K, backquote, backquote Y, backquote, backquote L, backquote, backquote E, backquote, backquote, backquote. I didn't scream. The sound was trapped in my throat. My body moved on its own, a surge of pure, mindless instinct. I scrambled backwards off the couch, my feet tangling in the rug. I fell hard on the floor, the impact jarring my teeth. I crawled, crab-like, towards the wall socket. My hands were shaking, fumbling for the power strip. My fingers closed around the thick cord of the laptop charger. I yanked. The plug came free from the socket with a sharp, plastic snap. The cord whipped through the air, and the transformer block at the end of it hit the wall with a hollow thud. The laptop screen died. The room was dark again. I lay on the floor, panting. The sound of my own ragged breaths filled the silence. I was slick with sweat. I pushed myself into a sitting position, my back pressed hard against the wall. I didn't take my eyes off the dead laptop. It was just a machine. A piece of plastic and metal. But it didn't feel like that. It felt like a dormant animal. Minutes passed. 5. Maybe 10. The frantic beat of my heart slowed to a heavy, pounding rhythm. The sweat on my forehead grew cold. I needed to know. I had to know if it was still there. Whatever it was. Slowly, shakily, I got to my feet. I walked over to the power strip, my legs feeling weak. I picked up the plug. The prongs were cool to the touch. I hesitated for a long second, then pushed it back into the socket. I watched the laptop from a distance. I pressed the power button. The familiar startup chime sounded, loud and cheerful and obscene in the dead quiet. The system loaded. Windows appeared. Everything looked normal. The file explorer was closed. The virus scan I ran came up clean. No strange programs in the startup log. It was just a computer. My shoulders sagged with a relief so profound it felt like a physical blow. A glitch. A bizarre, terrifying hacker. Some kid with too much time on his hands. It had to be. Then I saw the desktop. The wallpaper had changed. It wasn't one of the standard system backgrounds. It was a picture. A drawing. The kind a child makes. The lines were waxy and crude, done with a crayon on off-white paper that had been scanned or photographed. It showed two figures, hand in hand, under a lopsided yellow sun. One was a stick-thin boy with a mop of brown scribbled hair. The other was shorter, rounder, drawn with a clumsy, affectionate puffiness. They were both smiling with simple, curved lines. I felt a new kind of cold spread through me, a chilling recognition that went deeper than the marble. I knew that drawing. I knew the pressure of the crayon, the way the arm of the thin boy was just a little too long. I had drawn this. The thin boy was me. But the other one, he wasn't Andy. He was round, plump. Underneath him, written in my own blocky first-grade handwriting, was a name. Chubby. I did not sleep. The night was a long, dark stretch of time spent on the floor, my back against the wall, my eyes fixed on the inert bulk of the laptop. Every creak of the building settling, every siren wailing in the distance, was a jolt to my system. I watched the black rectangle of the window turn a deep gray, then a bruised purple, then a pale, sickly yellow. Morning. The city was waking up, but the thing in my apartment felt like it had been awake all night, watching me. The drawing of Chubby was still there on the screen when I finally, shakily, forced myself to stand. My legs were stiff, pins and needles shooting up from my ankles. I didn't turn the laptop off. I couldn't bring myself to touch it again. I just left it there, a monument to the previous night's madness. Leaving it on felt safer, somehow. As if shutting it down would be like closing my eyes in a room with a predator. I could see the drawing from the kitchen. The two stick figures. The lopsided sun. My childish signature. I needed coffee. The thought was mechanical, a routine from a life that no longer felt like mine. In the kitchen, my movements were slow, deliberate. I scooped grounds into the filter, poured water into the machine. My hands were steady. It was the forced calm of a man walking on a high wire. You don't look down. You don't think about the fall. You just put one foot in front of the other. The machine began to hiss and gurgle, the smell of dark roast filling the small space. It was a normal smell. A good smell. I clung to it. I leaned against the counter, waiting, my eyes staring at the linoleum floor. The hum of the refrigerator was a low, constant companion. I focused on it. A simple, mechanical sound. Grounded. Real. Then I felt it. A puff of air, cold and distinct, on the back of my neck. It was like someone had leaned in close and exhaled. Slowly. A sudden chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room bloomed across my shoulders and down my spine. My whole body went rigid. I spun around, my hand knocking a spoon from the counter. It hit the floor with a clatter that was loud enough to make me flinch. The kitchen was empty. Just the doorway leading back out to the living room. Nothing there. The window. The thought was a lifeline. The window must be open. I knew it wasn't. I knew I had checked every lock, every chain, a dozen times before the sun came up. I knew I was trying to lie to myself, to find an explanation that wouldn't shatter the thin shell of sanity I was trying to hold together. I swallowed hard, the sound loud in my throat. I grabbed a mug, the ceramic warm to the touch, and poured the black, steaming coffee into it. I needed to get back to the living room. I needed to see that drawing. I needed to confirm I hadn't dreamed it all. I took the mug and walked out of the kitchen. The living room was just as I had left it. The glow from the laptop screen was fainter in the morning light, but the drawing was still there. My eyes went from the screen to the floor, and that's when my heart stopped. The coffee mug slipped in my grasp, hot liquid sloshing over my fingers. I barely felt the burn. On the dark wood of the floor, starting near the closed door of the bathroom, was a set of footprints. They were small, the size of a child's bare feet, and they were wet. Each print was a perfect, glistening outline on the dusty floor, the arch and the 5 small toes clearly visible. There were 4 of them. Left, right, left, right. They led out from the bathroom door, crossed the worn rug where the marble had been, and then they just stopped. In the middle of the room, there was no 5th step, no trail leading anywhere else, just 4 wet prints that ended as if the person who made them had vanished into thin air. No, no, no. The words were a low whisper, steam from my own breath. I set the coffee mug down on the table with a loud clack. My chest was tight, a band of pressure squeezing my lungs. This wasn't a hacker. This wasn't a glitch. This was physical. This was water on my floor. This was someone, something, in my apartment. The fear was a cold, slick thing in my gut, but something else was rising with it. Anger. A hot, furious rage. This was my home. My space. It was the only place I had. An invasion. A violation. I took a half step toward the prince, my mind racing. Where did the water come from? How? Slam. The bathroom door crashed shut. The sound was like a gunshot in the apartment. A violent explosion of noise that made me cry out and stumble backward. It wasn't the sound of a door swinging shut on a draft. It was the sound of a door being thrown shut with immense force. The frame shook. A picture on the hallway wall tilted. My blood ran cold. I stared at the closed white door, my breath catching in my throat. It was in there. Whatever left the prince was in my bathroom. Right now. 10 feet away. Then came another sound. The unmistakable squeal of old pipes, followed by the hiss and patter of the shower turning on. Water, drumming against the cheap fiberglass of the tub. And through the sound of the water, something else began. A voice. A child's voice, humming. It was a simple, tuneless melody, the kind a kid makes up on the spot. But then the melody focused, found its rhythm, and I recognized it. It was the little song Andy and I used to sing when we were hiding from his older brother. A stupid, nonsensical tune about a frog on a log. My sanity shredded. This was happening. It was real. My eyes darted around the room looking for a weapon, for an escape. My phone. I needed my phone. I needed to call the police. It was on the arm of the couch. I lunged for it, my fingers fumbling with the smooth case. My thumb found the power button. The screen flickered to life. For a second, I saw my home screen, the grid of apps. Then the screen dissolved into a cascade of colored static, a buzzing, shrieking noise erupting from the tiny speaker. Then it went black. Dead. I stared at the useless black rectangle in my hand. I was cut off. Trapped. The humming from the bathroom continued, cheerful and obscene. The sound of the water was a constant roar. I backed away, my eyes locked on the bathroom door. I had to get out. The front door. The chain was still on, the deadbolt thrown. I could make it. I just had to turn my back on that bathroom door. I took a step back. Another. My muscles were screaming. My legs felt like they were moving through wet cement. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the sound of the shower and the humming stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. It was a heavy, listening silence. I was frozen in the middle of the room, halfway between the bathroom and the front door. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. Every nerve in my body was screaming at me, focused on that white wooden door. I strained my ears, listening for a footstep, a creak, anything. Nothing. Slowly, silently, I began to back toward the front door again. My hand was reaching behind me, fumbling for the lock. That's when I decided to do the stupidest thing I have ever done in my life. I stopped. I don't know why. Maybe it was the anger, maybe it was the need to know. To see what I was up against. I took a step toward the bathroom. Then another. I moved without making a sound, my bare feet sticking slightly to the floorboards. I reached the door, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I pressed my ear against the cool, painted wood. Silence. The silence of a tomb. I could hear my own blood roaring in my ears. Then a voice spoke from directly on the other side of the door. It wasn't a shout. It was a whisper. A dry, intimate whisper. So close it felt like it was inside my own head. "Want to play hide and seek?" A scream caught in my throat. A choked, strangled sound. I threw myself back from the door, my feet tangling beneath me. As I fell, my eyes were still locked on the doorknob. It was turning. The old brass knob was moving, not quickly, but with a slow, deliberate rotation. I could hear the inner mechanism of the lock grinding, a low, metallic scrape that seemed to go on forever. Scrape. Click. Scrape. It turned and turned until the latch was fully retracted. The world seemed to stop. There was only the sound of that knob and the frantic, wild hammering of my heart. I hit the floor hard, the impact jarring through my spine. I scrambled backward on my hands and heels, kicking at the floor, trying to get away. The door swung inward with a long, low creak. I yelled, a raw, animal noise of pure terror. I crab-walked backward until my head hit the wall on the other side of the hall. I squeezed my eyes shut, expecting something to lunge out, to grab me. I waited for the sound of footsteps, for a touch. Nothing happened. After a few seconds that felt like an eternity, I forced one eye open. The bathroom door was ajar, a dark slice of blackness in the morning light. The apartment was quiet again. No water, no humming, just the distant, indifferent sounds of the city outside. Was it gone? Slowly, my body trembling uncontrollably, I pushed myself up. My back was slick with sweat. I stood there for a long time, just breathing, panting like I'd run a marathon. I had to look. I had to know. I took one hesitant step, then another. I reached the doorway and peered inside. The small room was empty. The shower curtain was pulled back, showing the clean, dry tub. The floor was dry. The bath mat was undisturbed. It was as if nothing had happened. A wave of vertiginous relief washed over me, so intense it made me dizzy. I leaned against the doorframe, my legs weak. But then I saw the mirror above the sink. The shower had left it filmed with a light layer of condensation. And on the gray, misty surface, something had been written. A single word, traced by the tip of a small finger. The lines were still dark and wet, against the fading steam. Andy. My legs wouldn't work. For how long, I don't know. I was propped against the doorframe, staring at the name on the glass. Andy. The letters were still wet, darker than the fading gray mist around them. A child's finger had traced them. I could see the small trail where the water had beaded and dripped down toward the sink. The air was thick and heavy, smelling of soap and damp tile. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and ragged. My heart was a fist, punching the inside of my ribs. I pushed off the doorframe. My body moved like a machine made of old, rusted parts. I stumbled into the living room, my eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. The apartment was empty. The wet footprints on the floor had already begun to evaporate, the dark outlines turning into faint smudges on the wood. The laptop screen was black. It had gone to sleep. The drawing was gone. The front door. I had to get out. My hands fumbled with the chain, the metal links cold and heavy. I slid it free. The deadbolt was stiff. It took 2 tries before it turned with a loud, final thud. I pulled the door open and didn't look back. I didn't stop to grab my wallet or my keys. I just ran. I hit the button for the elevator, my finger jamming it over and over. A stupid, useless gesture. I gave up and threw myself at the stairwell door. It crashed open and I pounded down the concrete steps, the sound of my bare feet slapping against the grit echoing in the enclosed space. 3 flights. 4. My lungs burned. I burst out into the lobby. The doorman looked up from his newspaper, his eyes wide. I didn't stop. I pushed through the glass doors and out onto the street. The morning air was cool, but I was slick with sweat. The city noise was a wall of sound. Car horns, the rumble of a bus, people talking on their phones. It was normal. It was real. I leaned against a brick wall, gasping for air, my whole body shaking. A woman walking her dog gave me a wide berth. I probably looked insane. Barefoot, t-shirt, sweatpants. Wild-eyed. Maybe I was. I needed to talk to someone. Someone who wasn't in that apartment. Someone real. My mom. The thought was a lifeline. I still had my phone. It was in my pocket, a hard rectangle pressed against my leg. I pulled it out. The screen was still black. Dead. Shit. The car. My car keys were separate. They were on the little hook by the door. I had to go back. I couldn't go back. A payphone. On the corner, next to a boarded-up newsstand. A relic. I had no idea if it even worked. I dug in my pocket. A crumpled dollar bill and some loose change. It was enough. I walked to the phone, the broken pavement sharp under my bare feet. The greasy plastic receiver felt disgusting in my hand. I fed the coins into the slot with trembling fingers and dialed the number I knew by heart. It rang. Once. Twice. Hello? Her voice. My mother's voice. A wave of relief, so strong it nearly buckled my knees. Mom. I said. My own voice was thin, a stranger's. Kyle, is that you? What's wrong? You. Sound awful. No, I'm fine. Just a stressful week at work. That's all. It was a pathetic lie, but it was all I had. I needed to pretend things were normal for just a few seconds. I needed to hear her talk about the garden, or the neighbors, or anything that wasn't wet footprints and names on mirrors. A stressful week? Honey, you sound like you've seen a ghost. Are you eating properly? You always get like this when you don't eat. I'm eating, Mom. I didn't sleep well. I leaned my forehead against the cool metal of the enclosure. I closed my eyes. You need to take care of yourself, Kyle. Your father and we worry. I heard the click first. A tiny sound, like a fingernail tapping on glass, right in my ear. It came from the phone line itself, clear and distinct over my mother's voice. I went stiff. My mother was still talking, her voice fading into the background. Because you never tell us anything that's really going on. Then another voice spoke. It wasn't my mother. It was soft. A whisper. It was a child's voice, and it was layered right on top of the phone call, so close it felt like it was being spoken into my skull. Lying. The word was a drop of ice water on my brain. I jerked back from the receiver, almost dropping it. My blood ran cold. Mom? I interrupted, my voice sharp. Mom, did you hear that? Hear what, honey? I'm just saying we're concerned. Kyle, what's going on? Her voice was laced with genuine confusion, with worry. She hadn't heard a thing. Nothing. I think the line is bad. There was some static. Another lie. My throat was dry. I have to go. I'll call you later. Kyle, wait. I slammed the receiver back into its cradle. The connection cut. The whisper was gone, but I could still feel it. It was a physical sensation, an echo in my ear canal. This wasn't a glitch. This wasn't static. Someone was on my line. Someone was listening. I stumbled away from the payphone, my mind racing. I had to get away. Not just from the apartment, but from the whole block. The whole city. My car. I needed my car. I had to go back. There was no other choice. The journey back up the stairs was a slow, agonizing ascent into dread. Every step was heavy. Every floor I passed felt like a layer of earth being shoveled over me. I reached my floor. The hallway was empty. My front door was still ajar, just as I'd left it. I pushed it open. The apartment was silent. I didn't look toward the bathroom. My eyes were fixed on the small brass hook next to the door. The keys were there. I snatched them, my fingers closing around the cold metal. I didn't run this time. I walked out, pulling the door shut behind me, not bothering to lock it. In the parking garage, the air was cool and smelled of gasoline and old concrete. My car, a beat-up sedan, was right where I'd left it. I got in, locked the doors. The sound of the locks engaging, a heavy thunk, was the first moment of security I'd felt all morning. I was in a steel box. Safe. I put the key in the ignition and the engine turned over with a comforting rumble. For a moment, I just sat there, my hands gripping the steering wheel, my head leaned back against the headrest. I just needed to drive. Anywhere. Get onto the highway and just go. I put the car in reverse, backed out of the space, and headed for the exit ramp. As I pulled out onto the street, I reached for the radio knob. I needed noise. Music. Anything to fill the silence. Before my fingers could touch the dial, it came on by itself. A crackle of static, then a voice. It was my mother's voice. But Kyle, honey, you shouldn't keep things from me. I already know about Andy. I slammed on the brakes. The car screeched to a halt in the middle of the street. A horn blared behind me. My heart stopped. It was her voice. The exact tone. The exact cadence. It was a perfect continuation of the conversation I had just ended. It wasn't a recording of the call. It was the rest of the sentence she had been trying to say when I hung up. What the fuck? I whispered. My hand shot out, and I hammered the power button on the radio. Nothing happened. The light stayed on. Her voice was gone, replaced by a low, humming static. I jabbed the button again. And again. It wouldn't turn off. I took my foot off the brake and pressed the gas. My mind, a blank wall of panic. I drove. I didn't know where I was going. I just made turns at random, trying to put distance between me and my apartment, my phone, myself. The radio hummed. A low, electronic drone. It was a sound that scraped at my nerves. Then the voice came back. It wasn't my mother's this time. It was different. Colder. Clinical. Still her voice, but all the warmth had been surgically removed. "You killed him, Kyle!" The sound made me flinch. My hands tightened on the wheel. "No," I said to the empty car. "Shut up." "You pushed him. You let him fall. You watched." The voice was calm, stating facts. A news reporter reading from a teleprompter. "You are a murderer. You don't deserve to live." "Shut up," I yelled. I pounded my fist on the dashboard. The plastic shuddered, but the voice continued, relentless. Then it changed. The tone warped, the pitch rising, becoming younger. It was a boy's voice now. Andy's voice. A voice I hadn't heard in 20 years except in my nightmares. "Why'd you do it? I thought you were my friend." A sob tore from my throat. I couldn't breathe. I was choking on it. I didn't mean to. The voice shifted again. Deeper this time. Gruff. My father's. "I raised a coward. A weak, pathetic coward. You let that boy die and you ran away." Then another. A woman's. My third-grade teacher. "Such a disappointment, Kyle. So much promise. All wasted." One after another they came. A chorus of phantoms broadcasting from my dashboard. Voices I knew, voices I had almost forgotten, all of them speaking my deepest, most buried fears. They were telling my story. The one I never told anyone. I couldn't take it. I covered my ears, but the voices were inside my head, transmitted directly through the speakers. I yanked at the door handle. It wouldn't budge. I pulled it again, harder. Nothing. The lock was stuck. I was trapped, locked in this metal box, being bombarded by the ghosts of my own guilt. They were closing in, the voices weaving together into a tapestry of condemnation. I looked up, my vision blurred with tears. The road was a fast-moving ribbon of gray. I didn't care anymore. I just wanted it to stop. The noise. The voices. Everything. My foot pressed down. Gas pedal. Floor. The engine screamed, a high-pitched wail of protest. The car lurched forward. Streetlights and buildings became a smear of color in my peripheral vision. The tires squealed as I swerved around a corner, the car fishtailing wildly. The voices from the radio kept coming, louder now, a frantic, accusing shout. I closed my eyes. I didn't want to see what was coming. I just wanted silence. A massive trunk of a tree filled the windshield. My eyes snapped open. Instinct took over. I stomped on the brake with all my strength. The tires locked. The car screamed and shuddered, sliding sideways across the asphalt, the smell of burning rubber filling the air. It came to a violent stop just inches from the thick, gnarled bark of the old oak. Silence. The engine was still running, but the radio was off. The voices were gone. The silence was absolute, a physical weight in the car. I sat there, shaking, my whole body drenched in sweat. My chest heaved as I sucked in air. My knuckles were white. Where I gripped the steering wheel, I leaned forward, my forehead resting on the cool plastic. I was alive. After a long time I heard a sound. A soft click. I looked at the driver's side door. The lock, the little plastic knob had popped up. It was unlocked. I reached out, my hand trembling, and pulled the handle. The door opened. I sat there for another minute, just breathing. My eyes drifted to the passenger seat next to me. And I saw it. It sat in the center of the seat, perfectly still. A small, glass sphere. It was blue, a deep ocean blue, with a single, elegant white swirl frozen inside. The marble. The one from Andy's collection. It was sitting there, as if it had been placed by hand, as if it were watching me. I sat. The engine ticked as it cooled. My breath fogged a small patch on the inside of the windshield. The silence in the car was a solid thing. It had weight. It pressed in on me from all sides. My hands were still locked onto the steering wheel. I had to peel my fingers off one by one. They left damp prints on the plastic. My eyes were fixed on the passenger seat. The marble. It didn't roll. The car had screeched and slid sideways, a violent metal shudder, but the glass sphere sat in the dead center of the worn fabric seat, as if it had been placed there seconds ago. Deep blue. A swirl of white trapped inside, like cream stirred into coffee. Andes. The prize of his collection. He called it the cat's eye. I hadn't seen it in 20 years, not since the day of the picnic. The day of the fall. I reached for it. My hand shook so badly the motion was a series of small jerks. My fingertips brushed against the smooth, cool surface. It was real. A solid object in my car. I snatched my hand back as if I'd touched a hot stove. How? It was in my pocket that day. I ran. I never went back. I never saw it again. A car horn blared. A long, angry sound from down the street. It broke the spell. I was parked sideways, nose almost touching a tree, blocking a residential street. I had to move. I had to do something. My mind was a scramble of noise and impossible images. The voice on the radio. The name on the mirror. The marble. It didn't add up. None of it made sense. My options were few. Go back to the apartment? No. Never. Keep driving? Where? The entire city felt contaminated. My mind latched onto the only rational thought it could produce. I needed help. Not my mother, not someone who would panic. A professional. Someone paid to listen to people who were coming apart at the seams. Dr. Albright. The name came from an old business card I'd found in a drawer once, a referral from my work's HR department for stress management. I'd never called. I typed the name into my phone's map. An office on the west side of town. 20 minutes away. It felt like a plan. A thin, flimsy plan, but it was something. I put the car in drive. The tires crunched over loose gravel as I pulled away from the tree. I didn't look at the passenger seat again. I just drove. The waiting room was decorated in shades of beige. The air smelled of old paper and faint air freshener. I filled out the forms with a hand that still wasn't entirely steady. Name, Kyle Miller. Reason for visit, stress, insomnia. I left the other boxes blank. What was I supposed to write? My dead friend is leaving marbles in my car and making prank calls through my radio. They'd put me in a padded room. Mr. Miller? Doctor. Albright was a woman in her 50s, with neat gray hair and glasses that made her eyes look calm and intelligent. She led me to an office that was much like the waiting room, only with more books. I sat in a leather chair that sighed under my weight. So Kyle, she began, her voice even. Your form says you're here for stress and trouble sleeping. Can you tell me a little more about that? I told her a version of the truth. The pressure at work. The long hours. The feeling of being overwhelmed. I talked about waking up in the middle of the night, my heart pounding. I told her I felt edgy, like I was constantly waiting for something bad to happen. All of it was true. It just wasn't the whole truth. It wasn't even the important part. As I spoke, a persistent itch started on my left side, just over my ribs. I subtly reached under my shirt and scratched at it. The skin felt irritated, raw. Probably just dry skin from the weather. I tried to ignore it. And has anything specific happened recently? A trigger, perhaps, that might have heightened this anxiety? Her eyes were steady on me. It felt like she could see the parts of the story I was cutting out. No, not really. Just the usual. The lie felt thick in my mouth. My fingers raked over my side again, harder this time. The itch was a sharp, nagging fire. She nodded slowly. Sometimes, Kyle, these feelings of a looming threat, this insomnia, they can stem from unresolved issues, things from our past that we haven't properly processed. The word past hit me like a physical blow. The image of the marble flashed in my mind, the sound of a child's whisper, lying. I'm fine, I said, my voice too quick. My past is fine. I just need something to help me sleep. We talked for another 30 minutes. She prescribed some mild sleeping pills and suggested we meet again next week. I walked out of the office with a piece of paper in my hand, feeling no better than when I had walked in. I felt like a fraud. The sun was setting as I drove, the sky turning a bruised purple. I didn't go back to my apartment. I couldn't. I checked into a cheap motel off the highway, a grim place with a flickering neon sign and stained carpets. I locked the deadbolt, jammed the chain, and pushed a grimy armchair up against the door. I swallowed 2 of the pills with a plastic cup of tap water and fell onto the bed, fully clothed. I didn't want to think. I just wanted oblivion. Sleep came, heavy and black. And with it, the dream. I was in the car again. My old sedan. But it was wrong. The world was upside down. The roof was pressed against the dirt and grass. Broken glass glittered everywhere like black diamonds. The smell of gasoline and hot metal filled my lungs. My seatbelt was a strap cutting into my chest. I hung there, suspended. Rain was streaking down the inside of the windows. Or maybe it was up. I couldn't tell. Movement. A scraping sound. From the passenger side. I turned my head. It was a slow, painful motion. My neck screamed. Andy was there. He was hanging from his seatbelt too, his face just inches from mine. But it wasn't the Andy I remembered. His face was a pale, bloodless mask. A dark latticework of cuts covered his cheek where he'd gone through the windshield. His eyes were wide open, but they were vacant, milky white. He wasn't breathing. Then, he blinked. A thin trickle of blood leaked from the corner of his mouth and dripped upwards, toward the car's roof. He started to move. It was a horrifying, puppet-like motion, his limbs twitching. He unbuckled his seatbelt and dropped onto the ceiling of the car with a wet thud. He started to crawl towards me. His fingers, caked with mud and blood, scraped against the fabric headliner. "You left me, Kyle." His voice was a wet gurgle, the sound of air passing through fluid. "You just ran." "I didn't mean to," I tried to say, but no sound came out. My throat was clamped shut with terror. He reached me. His cold, tiny hand fumbled at my shirt. He pulled it up. His other hand, sharp and bony, raked down my side. It wasn't a gentle touch. It was a desperate, angry clawing. The pain was immediate and blinding. It felt like 3 sharp knives were being dragged through my skin, tearing through flesh. I screamed, a silent, choked sound trapped in my chest. He kept clawing, his dead eyes fixed on mine, his mouth still leaking blood. I woke up with a gasp. My body jerked upright on the motel bed. The room was dark, except for the red glow of the digital clock on the nightstand. 3:17 a.m. My shirt was soaked with sweat. My heart was a hammer against my ribs. The dream was already fading, but the feeling of it, the pain, it lingered. It was so real. My left side was on fire, a sharp throbbing agony. The same place as the itch. The same place he'd clawed at me in the dream. My hand trembled as I reached down and lifted the hem of my t-shirt. I stared. "Holy fuck," I whispered into the stale air of the room. It wasn't a dream. Han trend the toy ngay tren long which labavet sao. Sao. Dung va sung tai. Chung song sung mo kachwan hao. Yung jiot mao nyo liti ri ra. Tambao chiek au fong trang kwa toy. Vi tri ching herk. Kam jiak dal don ching herk. De kong fido toy. Tu kao trong luk ngu. Mong tai kwa toy ngan. De la nong vit rach. Knew the duok tau ra boy mo tu gidu saknon. I scrambled off the bed, stumbling into the small, grimy bathroom. I flipped the switch. The fluorescent light above the mirror flickered on with a hum, casting a harsh, sickly yellow light. I leaned over the sink, my hands gripping the porcelain edges, and braced myself to look. I stared at my reflection. My face was pale, my eyes wide with a look I didn't recognize. The man in the mirror looked hunted, but he was whole, unmarked, except for the terror in his eyes. I kept staring, my breath catching in my throat. Something was wrong. My reflection was fine. It was me, standing still, bracing against the sink. But, behind my reflection, on the tiled wall of the bathroom, my shadow was not still. My shadow was writhing. It was hunched over, bent at an impossible angle. Its shadowy arms were wrapped around its torso, clutching its side in the exact spot where I was wounded. The head of the shadow was thrown back, its mouth open in a silent, agonized scream. It was a silhouette of pure torment. I didn't move. I couldn't. I watched as my reflection stood frozen in fear, while the dark shape projected behind it convulsed in pain. My brain refused to process what my eyes were seeing. This is not real. It's a trick of the light. The flickering bulb. The stress. A hallucination brought on by the pills. I closed my eyes, tight. I counted to 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I opened them. The shadow was still there, still twisted in agony. A prisoner trapped on the wall. I felt a wave of nausea. The boundary between my mind and the world had dissolved. I didn't know what was real anymore. Was I seeing this? Was I imagining it? Was I the one in pain, or was it? Or were we the same thing? The shadow felt like a cage, and something inside it was being tortured. "This isn't happening," I whispered to my reflection. The shadow on the wall stopped moving. It slowly, unnaturally, straightened up. It raised its head. Even as a flat, dark shape, I could feel its gaze lock onto me. Its face, a featureless patch of darkness, seemed to twist with a rage that was terrifyingly potent. It lifted its arm. I saw the shadow arm swing through the air. In the same instant, a force like a brick wall slammed into the side of my head. The impact was deafening. My vision flashed white. My teeth rattled. I was thrown sideways, my body crashing against the shower door. The cheap plastic buckled and cracked. I slid down to the cold tiled floor, my ears ringing, the metallic taste of blood filling my mouth. I looked up, dazed. The shadow was standing over me. Not over my reflection, over me. It had detached from the wall. It was a three-dimensional patch of blackness, a hole in a world shaped like a man. It raised its leg. I saw the shadow foot swing forward. A brutal kick connected with my stomach. The air exploded from my lungs in a wet gasp. I folded in on myself, coughing, trying to crawl away. It kicked me again, this time in the ribs, right where the scratches were. A sharp, cracking sensation shot through my side. The pain was excruciating, a clean, bright nova of agony. I cried out. It was on me. The shadow didn't have weight, but it had force. A shadow fist pounded into my cheekbone. Another blow landed on my shoulder. I curled into a ball on the floor, my arms wrapped around my head. The blows kept coming. A relentless, vicious assault in complete silence, broken only by the sound of my own body hitting the hard tile and my choked, gasping sobs. It was beating me to death. My own shadow was murdering me. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The presence was gone. The only sound was the drip, drip, drip of water from the broken showerhead, pooling on the floor. I lay there for a long time, a crumpled heap on the wet tiles. Every part of my body screamed. I was shaking, not from cold, but from a depth of shock so profound it felt like it had hollowed me out. Slowly, painfully, I pushed myself up into a sitting position, my back against the wall. I tasted blood and bile. My cheek was swelling. My ribs felt broken. I was a wreck of bruises and pain. I looked up. The shadow was back on the wall, fused to my form. It was still, perfectly mimicking my broken posture. A puppet copying its master. My gaze fell to the floor. The water from the leaky shower had formed a shallow pool on the white tiles. It was still and clear, reflecting the harsh fluorescent light from above. In its surface, I saw a reflection. It wasn't me. Staring back up from the puddle was a child's face. Round cheeks, a button nose, eyes wide and glistening with unshed tears. It was the face of a boy I knew better than my own. It was Andy. The water in the puddle trembled, and the face of the boy dissolved into ripples. It wasn't the water moving. It was my hand, shaking as I pushed myself away from the reflection. My breath came in ragged, burning bursts. The taste in my mouth was rust and acid. The reflection of the single fluorescent bulb overhead wavered on the surface of the growing pool. Drip, drip, drip. The sound came from the cracked showerhead. A steady, maddening metronome, counting down to nothing. I got to my feet. Every joint protested. A sharp, focused point of fire flared in my ribs with every breath. I braced a hand against the grimy wall tile, smearing the condensation. I had to get out. I had to tell someone. The thought was a single, clean impulse in a maelstrom of confusion. Who? Not my mother. Not the police. They would see the room, see the state of me, and it would be over. The kind of over that involves straps and soft walls. Someone who had to believe me. Someone who knew the before. Megan. Andy's sister. The thought sent a jolt through me, a current of sick hope. She was the only other person who carried the weight of that day. She wouldn't understand this. Not the shadow or the voice, but she would understand the name. Andy. That name was the key. My bag was on the bed. I stumbled out of the bathroom, leaving wet footprints on the thin, stained carpet. My ribs were a cage of broken glass. I dumped the contents of the bag onto the unmade bed. A spare shirt, a toothbrush, my wallet, and my old, battered address book. I hadn't looked at it in years. The leather was cracked, the pages yellowed. I fumbled through it, my fingers thick and uncooperative. C.D.M. Miller. There. Tucked away under my own family's entries. A page for Andy's family. His father's number was crossed out. His mother's too. Then Megan's number, written in my younger, neater handwriting from a decade ago. Beside her name was a second note, scrawled in a frantic, barely legible hand that was mine, but not mine. It looked like it had been written in a hurry, with too much pressure on the pen. Don't call. She won't believe you. I stared at the words. I didn't remember writing that. When could I have written that? Maybe a few years ago, drunk and maudlin. A moment of self-pity. A stupid, meaningless note. It had to be. It was the only option I had. Ignoring the jagged script, I grabbed my phone from the nightstand. The screen was undamaged. I punched in the numbers, my thumb slick with sweat. I pressed the phone to my ear, the cool plastic a shock against my swelling cheek. It rang once. Twice. Hello? Her voice. Older, but unmistakably Megan's. The sound of it was like a floodlight cutting through the darkness in my head. Real. Solid. Another person. Megan, I gasped. The word came out as a raw croak. Megan, it's Kyle. Kyle Miller. A pause. The line hissed. Kyle? Jesus, it's been what, 20 years? Listen, I said, my words tumbling over each other. I paced the small space between the bed and the wall. Listen, I know this is going to sound crazy. I need help. Something is happening. It's about Andy. I said his name, and a chill washed over the room, the air growing heavy and cold. Andy? Her voice sharpened. What about Andy? He's here. I mean, not here, but he's contacting me. He's leaving things. He's talking to me. I sounded like a lunatic. I knew it. But I had to push through. The marble, Megan. The blue cat's eye. It was in my car. And he... I stopped, my throat closing up. Silence on the other end. I could hear the faint sound of a television in the background on her end. A game show, maybe. Normal life. Kyle? She said, her tone shifting. Cautious. Worried. Are you there? I can't hear anything. I opened my mouth to speak, to scream. But nothing came out. My jaw locked tight, the muscles in my neck seized like stone. A wave of pure panic washed over me. I tried to force a sound out, a grunt, anything. A low, strangled pressure built in my chest, but my lips wouldn't part. I was hammering on the inside of a soundproof box. Hello? Megan's voice again, louder now, annoyed. Is this some kind of prank? Because if it is, it's not funny. No, I'm here. I screamed it in my head. It's blocking me. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't just hurting me anymore. It was isolating me, building a wall around me, one brick at a time. The phone call was a test, and I had failed. It was letting me see the exit, then sealing it in front of my face. Look, I'm hanging up, she said. The television sound on her end got clearer for a second. The line went dead. The dial tone was a flat, piercing sound in my ear. I lowered the phone, my hand trembling. I stood in the center of the motel room, a universe of stale air and misery. The hope had been a brief, warm flare. Now the cold was absolute. I was not just alone, I was being held captive. The doors were locked from the inside of my own skull. I squeezed my eyes shut. The pain in my ribs was a hot, constant wire. The drip from the bathroom was the only sound. Drip, drip. My phone rang. My eyes snapped open. The screen lit up the dim room. The name displayed was Megan. She was calling back. A surge of adrenaline, of desperate, stupid hope shot through me. She'd heard something. She knew something was wrong. I swiped to answer, my hand fumbling. Megan! I yelled, and this time my voice worked. It was raw, shredded. I know what you're trying to do, Kyle. It was her voice, but it was wrong. All wrong. It was flat, devoid of any warmth, any inflection, cold and smooth like polished glass. The background noise was gone. There was only the voice and a deep, humming silence behind it. My blood ran cold. What? You think she'll save you? The voice continued, unwavering. You think anyone can, after what you did? Who is this? I whispered, backing away from the phone as if it were a snake. The voice on the other end laughed. It wasn't a human sound. It was a layered, metallic scraping, like knives being sharpened in a tunnel. You already know. You ran. You left him in the dirt. You ran, and you left me. The last word stretched, distorted, dropping in pitch until it was a low, electronic growl that vibrated through the casing of the phone and into the bones of my hand. You killed her brother. The bay had snapped shut. It wasn't just blocking me. It was wearing the faces of my past. It was taking my last hope and turning it into a weapon. This was its true game. Not just to wound the body, but to dismantle the mind piece by piece. A guttural sound of rage and terror ripped from my throat. I hurled the phone away from me. It flew across the room and slammed into the wall, right below the dark convex screen of the old television set. There was a sharp crack of plastic. The phone clattered to the floor in two pieces. The battery skittered under the edge of the bed. Silence. I stood panting in the center of the room, my chest heaving. My heart hammered against my broken ribs. It was over. The connection to the outside world was severed. I was finally, completely alone with it. A low hum started. I looked up. The big, black screen of the television was glowing. A faint, gray light pulsed from deep within the cathode ray tube. It shouldn't be on. It was an ancient model, the kind that needed to be turned on with a knob. The power cord hung limply from its back, a foot away from the wall socket. The gray light flickered, then resolved into an image. It was grainy, distorted and filmed from a low angle. It took my brain a moment to process the shakily held, cracked spiderweb pattern in the corner of the view. It was the feed from my phone's front-facing camera. From the floor where it lay broken, I could see my own legs in the frame, my torn jeans, my bare feet on the filthy carpet. I saw the foot of the bed, the cheap wooden dresser against the wall. And moving into the frame, I saw myself. My whole body. I was standing perfectly still in the middle of the room. My arms limp at my sides, my head tilted up toward the television screen that I was watching myself on. A nauseating feedback loop of sight. But there was something else. Behind my motionless figure on the screen, something was taking shape. It started as a shimmer in the air, a heat haze distortion. Then it darkened, coalescing from the dirty air of the room. A form. It was short, stocky. A shadow with the unmistakable outline of a child. It had no face, no features, just a deep, light-devouring blackness. It grew more solid, a hole in the reality of the motel room captured by the dead phone's eye. It was right behind me. I could not feel it. I could not hear it. There was no breath on my neck, no change in the air temperature. But on the screen, it was there. Its shadowy form was inches from my back. Slowly, on the television, the shadow child began to raise its arms. The movements were gentle, deliberate. It was reaching for me, like it wanted to give me a hug from behind. I forgot how to breathe. The world narrowed to the glowing rectangle of the TV screen and the horrifying scene it displayed. My body was a statue of ice. I did not want to turn. To turn was to make it real. As long as I only saw it on the screen, it was just an image. A trick. A ghost in the machine. But I had to know. The muscles in my neck felt like old rope, threatening to snap. With a grinding, mechanical slowness that felt like it took an eternity, I began to turn my head. The instant my gaze broke from the television, the screen went black. The hum died. A single high-pitched whine faded into nothing, and the room was plunged back into near darkness, lit only by a sliver of moonlight through the grimy window. There was nothing behind me. The air was still. The space where the shadow had been was empty. I was alone. I spun the rest of the way around, my eyes darting into every corner, every patch of darkness. Nothing. Just the bed, the dresser, the cheap art bolted to the wall. A flicker of light on the floor drew my eye. The broken screen of my phone. It was still lit. I crept closer, my heart in my throat, and knelt down. The cracked screen still showed the image from its camera. It showed the empty space where I had been standing. The figure of the child was gone from that view too. No, not gone. It was standing where I had been. It had taken my place. A small, dark silhouette in the center of the frame. And as I stared into the shattered glass, the shadow child lifted its hand. It gave a small, friendly wave. Not at the empty room. It was waving directly at me, through the lens. My knees made a wet sound on the carpet when I pushed myself up. The image from the phone screen was burned onto the back of my eyes. The small, dark shape, the casual wave. I scrambled backwards, my hands and feet crab-walking away from the broken device until my back hit the flimsy wood of the nightstand. The impact sent a fresh spike of fire through my ribs. I gasped, a sound like a punctured tire. My head swiveled, scanning the room. The corners were deep in shadow. The moonlight through the window cut a pale, dusty rectangle on the floor. Nothing moved. There was no sound but my own ragged breathing, and the steady drip, drip, drip from the bathroom. The air was thick, heavy with the smell of mildew and my own cold sweat. I was losing it. That was the only answer. The fall in the bathroom, the blow to my head, the stress. It was all spiraling. I was seeing things, hearing things, the phone call, the TV. My mind was breaking apart under the weight of this place, of what I'd done. I needed an anchor. Something real. Something from before. My duffel bag was still sprawled on the bed where I'd dumped it. Inside, beneath the clothes and the useless address book, was a shoebox. It was old, the cardboard soft and bowed with age, taped shut with yellowed packing tape. Andy's mom had given it to me a month after the funeral. He would have wanted you to have this, she'd said, her eyes looking past me. I'd never opened it, not once in 20 years. It felt like disturbing a grave. Now, I needed it. I needed to see his face in a photo, to hold something he'd held, to prove to myself that he was a memory, not a phantom haunting a cheap motel room. I lunged for the bag, my body screaming in protest. I ripped the box out and sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress springs groaning. My fingers were clumsy, fumbling with the petrified tape. It cracked and flaked away under my nails. I lifted the lid. The smell hit me first. The distinct scent of old paper, sun-faded fabric, and something else. The faint, clean smell that was just Andy. It was like a punch to the gut. I took out the items one by one, arranging them on the dusty surface of the nightstand like religious artifacts. A worn baseball. The leather was scuffed, the red stitching frayed. I remembered playing catch with it in his backyard until the sun went down. A photograph, curled at the edges. The two of us, maybe 10 years old, grinning with missing teeth. I had a grass stain on my knee. He had his arms slung around my shoulder. We were invincible. A comic book, The Amazing Spider-Man. The cover was creased from being read 100 times. A small, heavy Zippo lighter with his initial A engraved on the side. He was so proud of it, even though he didn't smoke. It was the first adult thing he'd ever owned. And at the bottom of the box, his watch. I picked it up. A simple Timex with a scratched crystal face, and a cheap, expandable metal band that always pinched the hairs on your arm. The hands were frozen at 4:17. The exact time I'd last seen it on his wrist, just before. The watch had been broken in the fall. It hadn't moved in 2 decades. It was a monument to a single terrible moment. I held it in my palm, my thumb stroking the cool, scratched glass. A piece of the past. A dead thing. Proof. He was gone. This thing on my phone in my head was not him. It was a sickness inside me. I had to get a grip. As I looked at it, the impossibly thin red second hand gave a single, spastic twitch. I froze. It was a flicker. So small I could have imagined it. A trick of the light. A tremor in my hand. I stared at it, my heart beginning to hammer against my ribs again. Nothing. It was still. 4:17. Just my mind playing its games. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. "It's just you," I muttered. "It's just you." I placed the watch carefully on the nightstand next to the other items, lining it up with the edge. I needed to focus on something else. I picked up the small, spiral-bound notebook that had been in the box. His handwriting was a messy, boyish scrawl. I opened it at random, a list of video games he wanted to buy. A doodle of a rocket ship. I turned a page. And another. Then I heard it. Tick. The sound was sharp, clean, and impossibly loud in the small room. Talk. My head snapped up. My eyes shot to the nightstand. Tick. Talk. Tick. Talk. The red second hand on the Timex was moving. not twitching. It was sweeping around the dial with a steady, relentless purpose. But it wasn't going forward. It was going backward. My blood turned to ice water. The hand swept past the 6, then the 5, the 4. The minute hand shuddered, then clicked backward 1 notch. It was unwinding time. It was marching back, second by second, toward the moment he was alive. This wasn't a trick of the light. This wasn't a hallucination. This was happening. The sound was a physical thing in the room. A nail being hammered into my skull with each tick. Fear gave way to something else. A hot, red wave of fury. It started in my stomach and surged up into my throat. This was a desecration. My memories, the last pure thing I had of him, were being twisted, used as a weapon against me. The shadow on the phone was one thing. A voice on the line was another. But this was an invasion of something sacred. "What do you want?" I growled at the empty air. My voice was a low, shaking thing. "You want me to feel bad? I feel bad every goddamn day. What more do you want from me?" As if in answer, a low hum started. It was the same hum from the television, but it wasn't coming from one place. It was coming from the nightstand. The baseball trembled, vibrating against the wood. The Zippo lighter rattled. The photograph began to buzz, skittering across the surface like a dying insect, and the notebook in my hands came alive. The pages began to flip, not from a breeze. There was no breeze. They turned with a deliberate, mechanical speed, one after another, a blur of white and blue ink. Flap, 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 flap. The sound filled the room, drowning out the backwards ticking of the watch. I was too stunned to let go, my fingers locked around the cover. It showed me flashes of his writing. Entries I'd never seen. "Kyle's new friend is mean. He told me to shut up today. He never does that." Flap. I saw Kyle talking to himself in the woods. His voice was different. Lower. Scared me. Flap, flap. He pushed a cat out of a tree. He laughed. It wasn't his laugh. The pages kept turning. A chronicle of a change I didn't remember. A story of a boy watching his best friend become a stranger. My stomach churned. It was a history of the monster that was now hunting me. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The humming ceased. The objects on the nightstand fell still. The notebook in my hands was silent. It had stopped on a fresh, blank page. The crisp, blue lines waited, empty. A black ballpoint pen, which had been sitting near the lamp, gave a slight shudder. Then it began to roll. Slowly, deliberately, it rolled across the surface of the nightstand, over a dust ring, past the photograph of our smiling faces. It rolled until it stopped right at the edge of the table, next to my hand, pointing at the blank page. An invitation. A demand. I stared at the pen. I understood. It wasn't enough to haunt me. It wasn't enough to torment me. It wanted a confession. It wanted me to write it down, to give it form, to make it real in my own hand. "No," I whispered. Then louder, a raw shout that tore at my throat. "Never!" This was the line. I would not cross it. I would not participate in my own destruction. I would not let this thing, this memory, this sickness, use my own hands against me. I was still in control of my own body. My right hand twitched. It was an involuntary spasm, a muscle firing off. I looked down at it. My fingers, curled into a loose fist, began to uncurl, one by one. Index, middle, ring, pinky. My thumb unlocked. My hand lay open, palm up, on my thigh. It wasn't me doing it. I watched, a passenger in my own skeleton, as my hand lifted from my leg. It rose slowly, hovering in the air between me and the nightstand. It turned, palm down, and began to move forward, reaching for the pen. A jolt of pure animal terror, AHOT, through me. My left hand reacted on instinct. It shot out, a blur of motion, and clamped down on my right wrist. It was like grabbing a piece of cold metal. The fight began. My right arm strained forward, muscles bunched and hard. My left arm dug in, my own fingers biting into my own flesh, trying to hold it back. A low grunt escaped my lips. It was a war, fought in total silence. A hideous tug of war with my own limbs. The right arm was stronger. It pulled, dragging my left arm with it inch by agonizing inch toward the pen. My teeth were clenched so hard my jaw ached. Sweat poured down my face, stinging my eyes. I was losing. The entity, the thing inside, the other, whatever it was stronger. Its will was a steel cable, and mine was a fraying rope. With a surge of power that felt alien, my right arm jerked forward. The movement threw my entire body off balance. I toppled off the edge of the bed, crying out as I hit the floor. The impact was a brutal shock. The pain in my ribs exploded into a white-hot nova, stealing my breath. But the struggle didn't stop. I was on my side, on the filthy carpet, and my right hand was still crawling, still pulling. It dragged my entire upper body across the floor. The rough fibers of the carpet scraped against my cheek. My left hand was failing, its grip slick with sweat. I was wrestling myself in the dirt. A sound ripped out of my throat. Not a word, but a guttural roar of effort and rage. I was a puppet fighting its strings. My right hand, the traitor, stretched, its fingers reaching, trembling with the immense strain. They brushed against the pen. They closed around it. The cool plastic was a death sentence in my own grip. It had the pen. It began to drag me back toward the notebook on the bed, my left hand now a useless appendage being pulled along for the ride. The pen was held aloft, its tip aimed at the blank page. I was going to be forced to write it, to sign my own name to this nightmare. With the last ounce of will I possessed, I gave one final, violent twist. I threw all my weight in the opposite direction. My body slammed against the leg of the bed. The shock, the jolt of pain, was enough. The tension in my right arm vanished. It went limp, the pen dropping from its nerveless fingers. It clattered onto the floor. I lay there, gasping for air, a wreck of a man on a motel room floor. My chest heaved. Every muscle screamed. My cheek was raw from the carpet. The taste of dust and blood was in my mouth. But my arm was my own again. The presence, the force, had receded. For a moment I just lay there, listening to the drip from the bathroom. Then, slowly, shakily, I pushed myself up onto my elbows. My gaze fell upon the notebook. It was still open. On the blank page. It wasn't blank anymore. In the struggle, in the frantic, violent seconds before I had won, the hand had managed to touch pen to paper. Scrawled across the top of the page, in a jagged, spidery script that was a horrifying parody of my own, were 3 words. Help me. The 3 words were an acid burn on the page. Help me. My own handwriting, yet not my own. A stranger's plea using my voice. I stayed on the floor, the side of my face pressed into the cheap, gritty carpet. My right arm was a dead thing next to me, a disconnected piece of meat. The pen lay a few inches from my fingers. I didn't dare touch it. I didn't dare touch myself. Breath returned to my lungs in painful, shallow gulps. The air tasted of dust and my own failure. I had won the physical fight, but I had lost something more important. A line had been crossed inside my own skull. A border had been breached. The enemy was no longer at the gate. It was in the command tower, pulling levers, writing messages with my own hand. Slowly, using my left arm, I pushed myself up. My ribs screamed, a sharp, stabbing protest with every movement. I sat on the floor, my back against the flimsy frame of the bed. The room felt different. Smaller. The shadows were thicker. The silence was heavier. The drip, drip, drip from the bathroom was the only sound. A water torture metronome counting down my sanity. I couldn't stay like this. Exposed. The window was a great, dark eye looking in. The door was a thin sheet of wood. I needed walls. I needed darkness. I found the stack of old newspapers next to the Gideon's Bible on the desk. They were a week old, the ink already smelling faint and musty. With them and the roll of packing tape from my duffel bag, I began my work. My movements were stiff, robotic. I was an automaton running on a single directive, in close. I taped the first sheet over the top pane of the window. The thin light from the parking lot vanished. The room plunged into a deeper gloom. I worked my way down, overlapping the pages. Headlines about city council meetings and local sports became my armor. The faces of smiling politicians and car salesmen stared blankly into the room. I was walling myself in, building a paper tomb. The crinkle and screech of the tape was loud, a frantic sound in the quiet. I sealed every edge, every corner, until no light could get in. Then I moved to the door. I stuffed a towel into the crack at the bottom. I used the tape to seal the frame, running strip after strip over the gap between the door and the jamb. It wouldn't stop anyone, not really. But it was a ritual. It was an act of control in a situation where I had none. When I was done, I stood in the center of the room. The only light was the faint amber glow from the digital clock on the nightstand. 4:51. The air was already close and warm. I could smell the newsprint and the adhesive from the tape. I was in a box of my own making. I sank onto the edge of the bed, my body a collection of aches and tremors. My gaze fell on the notebook, still open, the terrible message scrawled across it. I slammed it shut. I sat there. I stared into the dark, waiting, listening. For what? I didn't know. The backward ticking of the watch had stopped. The objects on the nightstand were still. I was just a man in a dark room with the echo of his own violence. Maybe I had won. Maybe the effort of the fight had exhausted it. That's when I saw it. On the wall opposite the bed. It was just a discoloration at first. A dark patch on the cheap, cream-colored wallpaper, no bigger than my hand. It looked wet. My first thought, a dull and distant one, was a leaky pipe. This whole place was a wreck. A drip inside the wall. It figured. Great, I muttered to the empty air. My voice sounded flat and dead. Just great. I watched it, expecting a trickle to start, for the stain to run down toward the baseboard. But it didn't. It didn't spread. It held its shape, and then, as I watched, it began to change. The edges seemed to pull inward, to darken. The center lightened. It was a slow, subtle transformation, like watching a cloud shift its form over minutes, not seconds. The vaguely circular patch began to elongate. It developed a sharp curve. I got to my feet. A cold dread, different from the earlier panic, crept up my spine. It was the dread of recognition. The patch was no longer just a stain. It was becoming a picture. A familiar, sickening image, drawn in shades of dampness and grime. The sharp, downhill bend in the road. The tall oak tree standing just beyond the shoulder. The spot where the guardrail had been torn away. It was the place where my life had ended and this half-life had begun. It was the corner where Andy died. No, I whispered. I took a step back, bumping into the bed. What do you want from me? You can't be in here. My safe room. My paper tomb. It was useless. The wall itself was becoming a screen for my worst memory. The darkness didn't hide me. It was the canvas. I stared, unable to look away, as the image became sharper, more defined. The texture of the asphalt, the pattern of bark on the tree. It was all there, rendered in mold and decay. Then it moved. It wasn't a sudden jolt. It was a fluid, horrifying shift. From the top of the curve in the road, 2 pinpricks of light appeared. Headlights. They grew larger, brighter, as a silent spectral car made of shadow and damp plaster sped down the curve. My car. I could feel the ghost of the steering wheel in my hands, the vibration of the engine through the floorboards. The car raced toward the turn. I knew what came next. The loss of control. The tires squealing, the sickening lurch as we left the road, the explosive sound of metal hitting oak. I braced myself for it, my muscles tensing for an impact that had happened 2 decades ago. But this time, something was different. The scene slowed. The perspective shifted, swinging around to the driver's side window. I saw myself. A younger me, 20 years old, hands gripping the wheel. And I wasn't panicked. I wasn't scared. I was smiling. It was a wide, terrible smile. A grin of pure malice, of ugly intent. As the car reached the apex of the turn, I saw my head, my smiling face, jerk the wheel to the right. A deliberate, violent act. The car didn't skid. It was aimed. It was launched toward the tree like a missile. The image froze on that smile for a single eternal second before the whole scene dissolved back into a meaningless dark stain on the wall. Liar! The word tore from my throat, a raw, ragged sound. That's a lie! I stumbled forward, pointing a shaking finger at the wall. It was an accident. I lost control. The road was wet. It wasn't like that. My own memory was clear. The panic, the frantic fight with the wheel, the terror in Andy's eyes. This thing on the wall, it wasn't just showing me the past. It was rewriting it. It was changing the narrative, twisting a tragedy into a murder. It was painting me as a monster in my own mind. My memories, the very foundation of who I was, were under assault. If I couldn't trust what I remembered, what was left of me? The fury from before returned, but this time it was white-hot and absolute. It was the rage of the cornered. I wasn't fighting a ghost anymore. I was fighting for my own story, for the memory of the boy I used to be. My eyes darted around the room and landed on the wooden desk chair. It was solid, heavy. An instrument. I grabbed it. The wood felt good in my hands, solid and real. I lifted it high over my head, my muscles straining. I faced the wall, that damned spot where the lie had been projected. I let out a yell that was pure, animal rage, and I swung. The chair connected with the wall with a deafening crash. Plaster exploded. The wallpaper ripped. The chair leg punched a hole straight through the drywall. The impact shot up my arms, a painful, satisfying jolt. I didn't stop. I swung again, and again. Wood splintered against studs. I was a machine of destruction. With each blow I was trying to kill the image, to smash the lie. Dust and debris filled the air, chalky and thick in my throat. I coughed, but I kept swinging. The chair came apart in my hands, a leg breaking off, the back shattering. I was left with just the seat and a single leg, a crude club. I battered the hole, making it wider, ripping away huge chunks of drywall and wallpaper. Finally, I was spent. I dropped the remains of the chair. It clattered to the floor. I stood there, heaving, my chest on fire. My knuckles were bleeding where I'd scraped them against the wall. Sweat poured down my face, carving clean paths through the white dust that caked my skin. I had created a gaping, ragged hole in the wall. It was a wound, a dark mouth leading into the guts of the building. I stared into it, my breath slowly returning. Inside the darkness between the wall studs, past the dangling wires and chunks of insulation, was something else. Something that didn't belong. A dark rectangular shape was wedged between two wooden beams. It was a metal box. My heart hammered against my ribs. How could that be in there? It was impossible. This was a random motel room hundreds of miles from home. My hand moved on its own, compelled by a force stronger than fear. I reached into the jagged hole, my arms scraping against the sharp edges of broken drywall. My fingers brushed against cold, rusted metal. I hooked my fingers around it and pulled. It was heavier than it looked. I worked it free from its hiding place and brought it out into the dim light of the room. I knew it instantly. My stomach dropped. It was a small, tin lunchbox, rusted shut around the edges. Batman was on the lid, faded and scratched. Andy's lunchbox. We had turned it into our time capsule when we were 8. We had buried it in his backyard, under the loose flagstone behind the rose bushes, swearing a solemn cross-your-heart oath to dig it up when we were old men. It couldn't be here. It was a violation of every law of reality I knew. And yet, here it was, in my hands. My fingers, clumsy and shaking, worked at the rusted clasp. It was fused shut with age and corrosion. I used the broken pin from the floor as a lever, jamming it into the seam and prying. The metal groaned, and then, with a sharp snap, the lid popped open. The smell of old paper and dried leaves hit me. Inside lay a few baseball cards, a pet rock with googly eyes glued on, a plastic sheriff's badge, childhood treasures, and underneath them, a small blue spiral-bound notebook, Andy's diary, the one he always kept hidden. I lifted it out. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely hold it. I opened it. His neat, careful cursive filled the pages. I flipped through, seeing entries about school, about his dog, about a girl he liked. Then I came to the last entry. It was dated 2 days before the crash. The page was marked with a folded corner. His handwriting was different. Messy. Hurried. It read, "Kyle isn't Kyle anymore. He's been strange for weeks. Says bad things. Laughs when he shouldn't. Chubby doesn't come around when he's here. I think he's scared of him. So am I. Chubby isn't his friend. It is something else. It is taking my friend." The paper in my hands was dry, brittle. The smell of it, old, acidic, mixed with the chalk of the shattered wall, filled my throat. The words on the page were a lifeline. Kyle isn't Kyle anymore. A validation, a piece of proof from 2 decades ago. I wasn't losing my mind. Andy saw it. He knew. Something was attached to me. Something that had been there for years. Chubby. It wasn't a friend, it was something else. I lowered the small notebook, my knuckles white. The dust in the air swirled in the single beam of amber light from the clock. 5:03. I was breathing hard, a ragged sawing sound. I had just destroyed a wall. I had found a time capsule that shouldn't exist. And in it, I had found the one thing that told me I wasn't just imagining all this. My eyes went back to the page. I read the messy, hurried words again. And again. I think he's scared of him. So am I. A cold comfort. Andy was scared too. We were both victims of this thing. The thought didn't make me feel better. But it made me feel less alone. Less insane. It was real. It had a history. I was about to close the diary, to put it away with its impossible box, when my right hand moved. It was the same detached sensation as when it had written the message. Not a spasm. A deliberate, controlled action that was not my own. My own muscles, my own tendons pulling against my will. My left hand shot out and clamped down on my right wrist, trying to stop it. It was like fighting myself. The muscles in my arm bunched. A bizarre tug of war played out on my own body. "Stop it," I grunted, the words pushing through my clenched teeth. The right hand was stronger. It was unnervingly strong. The thumb, guided by that unseen puppeteer, slid under the edge of the pages. It began to flip backward. Not slowly. It was a methodical, steady motion. Page after page turned over with a soft, dry rasp. I couldn't stop it. It was like watching a machine perform its function. My fingers, my hand, were just the instrument. I gave up fighting, my left hand falling limp at my side. I just watched as the pages flew by. Entries about summer vacation, baseball games, the new Star Wars movie. A life I faintly remembered. A life before the curve in the road. The hand stopped. It held the book open to a page near the beginning. The date was written neatly at the top. October 12th. My 10th birthday. The handwriting was Andy's usual careful script, not the frantic scrawl of the last entry. I leaned closer. My eyes scanned the page. Kyle's party was today. His mom made a big cake. We played Nintendo all afternoon. It was fun at first. Then he got weird. We were playing Punch-Out and I beat him. I beat him all the time. But he got angry. Not regular angry. His eyes got this look. I can't describe it. He said he was glad Dad lost his job, said we were poor now and he didn't want poor friends. Then he just smiled. He didn't say sorry. Later, I saw him take the new remote car I got him and break the antenna off. On purpose. He tried to hide it, but I saw him. It was like my friend went away for a minute, and somebody mean took his place, like someone else was wearing his skin. The words didn't compute. They were just black marks on a page. They didn't fit with anything I knew. Andy and I were inseparable. We never fought like that. I remembered that birthday. I remembered the cake. I remembered the Nintendo. I didn't remember breaking his toy. I didn't remember saying those things. It was a lie. It had to be a lie. Why would Andy write that? This thing, this entity, it hadn't just brought the box here. It had changed what was inside. It was planting false memories, writing a new history to mess with my head. Like the vision on the wall. Another lie. That's when the voice came. It wasn't the whisper from the corner of the room. It wasn't the backward hiss from the watch. It was inside my head, clear as a bell. And it wasn't monstrous. It wasn't evil. It was terrified. Don't you remember? Please, Kyle. Don't you remember what you did? The voice was young. It was the voice of a child. It was the voice of Chubby, my imaginary friend, but all the malice was gone. It was pleading. Shut up, I whispered, pressing the heels of my hands to my temples. The room seemed to tilt. The walls, papered over with old news, felt like they were inching closer. The air grew thick, heavy. You locked me in. After that day, you were so strong. You just pushed me down. Deep inside. You took the key. You took my name. You took my face. A wave of dizziness washed over me. I squeezed my eyes shut. This was a new tactic. A new trick. Playing the victim. Trying to make me feel sorry for it. You're a demon. A thing. You're not real. My own words sounded hollow. A desperate prayer in a collapsing church. I was real. This was my body. These were my friends. You took everything. And then you killed him. You killed Andy. No! The word ripped out of me, a raw, physical denial. I staggered backward, tripping over the leg of the shattered chair. I fell hard. The back of my head hit the floor. The impact sent a starburst of white light through my vision. The amber glow of the clock pulsed. The darkness in the room seemed to breathe, to expand and contract with the frantic pounding in my chest. Lying on the floor, staring up at the ceiling I couldn't see, the voice continued its desperate, pathetic assault. He saw you. He knew it wasn't me anymore. He was going to tell someone. He was scared. So you drove the car off the road. It wasn't an accident. You aimed for the tree. I saw it. I saw it through your eyes. Liar, I gasped, tasting dust and blood where I'd bitten my tongue. You're a goddamn liar. My rage was a fire. It burned away the confusion. It was the only thing that felt solid. This thing was trying to break me by corrupting the one good thing I had left, my friendship with Andy. By twisting my grief into guilt. It was trying to make me believe I was the monster. I had to see myself. I had to ground myself in what was real. My face. My body. I scrambled on my hands and knees, my palms scraping against splinters and grit. The mirror in the bathroom was shattered. The vanity mirror was a spiderweb of cracks, but there was a piece on the floor. A large, jagged shard near the doorway, maybe a foot long. I crawled to it. I picked it up. The edges were sharp. I could feel them pressing into my fingers. I held it up. The dim, weak light of the clock caught the silvered surface. I stared into it, desperate to see my own face, to see the panicked, victimized man I knew I was. What looked back was me. My face. My matted hair. The dust and sweat streaking my skin. But the eyes were wrong. They weren't my eyes. My eyes were filled with rage, confusion, and fear. The eyes in the mirror were filled with a different kind of fear. A deeper, more profound terror. The horror of a prisoner looking out from behind the bars of his cell. They were wide, pleading, and utterly desperate. It was the face of someone screaming without a mouth. I stared, my breath catching in my throat. We looked at each other, me and the man in the glass. The cornered animal and the caged soul. Time stopped. The drip from the faucet stopped. The pounding in my chest stopped. There was only this silent, impossible standoff. Then, the mouth of my reflection moved. No sound came out. It was a slow, deliberate movement, a silent message formed by lips I could no longer feel were my own. 4 simple, devastating syllables. I read them as clearly as if they'd been screamed in my ear. Give it back to me. A cold shock, colder than any fear I had felt before, shot through my entire nervous system. It was a jolt of pure WTF, a violation of everything I understood about reality. I flung the mirror shard away from me. It hit the far wall with a sharp crack and clattered to the floor. I pushed myself backward, scuttling away from it like a crab, my hands and feet scrabbling for purchase. No. 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 The word was a useless, repetitive chant. I got to my feet, my legs shaking. I couldn't look in that direction anymore. My head swam. I needed air. I needed light. My heel caught on something hard. The metal lunchbox. I stumbled, kicking it. The lid, already broken, flew open, and its contents scattered across the grimy carpet. The baseball cards. The googly-eyed rock. The cheap plastic badge. Andy's diary. And something else. Something that had been hidden beneath the diary, nestled in the corner. It skittered across the floor and came to rest near the leg of the upturned bed frame. It was small. It glinted. A key. A small, silver key. The kind used for a diary, or a jewelry box, or a glove compartment. My body went rigid. The frantic energy drained out of me, replaced by a still, heavy dread. I knew that key. I recognized the distinct, stylized F of the Ford logo stamped into its head. It was the key to the glove box of my 1982 Escort, the car that was a mangled heap of scrap metal in a junkyard 2 states away. And with the sight of the key, a memory broke through the fog. Not a whispered lie from a voice, not a flickering image on a wall. A real memory. A tactile memory. The feeling of my own fingers, 20 years ago, shaking as I turned this exact key in the lock. The click of the latch. The smell of the vinyl and old maps inside. The feeling of shoving something small and hard into the back, behind the owner's manual. The act of hiding something in the immediate chaotic aftermath of the crash. Before the first sirens grew loud, I remembered hiding something. I just couldn't remember what it was. The key felt heavy in my palm, heavier than a piece of metal had any right to be. The stamped F was worn smooth, but I could feel its shape with my thumb. It was a physical thing. It was real. A memory connected to it was real. Hiding something in the dark, with the smell of leaking fluids and shattered glass in the air. I didn't think. I moved. My legs worked, carrying me out of the ruined bedroom, down the stairs. The front door was open, the night air was cool. I got in my car. The engine turned over on the second try. The headlights cut 2 cones of white into the darkness. I drove. The key was in my pocket. Every few seconds, my hand went down to touch it, to confirm it was still there. It felt like a tumor, a small, hard knot of truth I didn't want to acknowledge. Where do dead cars go? They go to a junkyard. There was only one of any size within an hour's drive. I knew the name from the radio jingles, Miller's Auto Salvage. I headed east. The miles passed. The streetlights thinned out, then disappeared. There were only trees, dark shapes against a darker sky. The voice in my head was silent. The reflection in the shard of mirror was gone. There was only the low hum of the engine and the feeling of the key against my thigh. I wasn't chasing a ghost anymore. I was chasing a memory. I was chasing a piece of evidence. I needed to see what I hid. I needed to know why. Miller's was a massive, fenced-in field of automotive corpses. A 10-foot chain-link fence topped with barbed wire surrounded the place. The main gate was locked with a thick chain and a heavy padlock. A sign read, "No trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted." I parked 100 yards down the road, where the woods grew close to the fence. I killed the engine. The silence was immediate and thick. The only sound was a low, constant hum from a distant power substation. Getting over the fence was work. The metal bit into my hands. My jeans caught on a barb at the top, tearing with a loud rip. I hit the ground inside with a grunt, my ankle twisting slightly. I stood up, breathing hard, tasting dirt and sweat. The yard was a city of the dead. Cars were stacked 3 high in some places, their bodies crushed together in a final, metallic embrace. Moonlight glinted off shattered windshields and chrome bumpers. Rust was everywhere, a fine red dust that seemed to coat everything. I started walking, my feet crunching on gravel and broken glass. I was looking for a ghost. A 1982 Ford Escort. Blue. 20 years was a long time. It could be anywhere. It could have been crushed into a cube years ago. But I had to look. I moved through the rows, a shadow among shadows. The skeletons of cars stared at me with empty headlight sockets. I felt like I was trespassing in a cemetery. I found it in the back corner, almost completely overgrown with weeds and thorny vines. It wasn't stacked. It sat alone, tires long since rotted away, its frame settled deep into the dirt. It was barely recognizable. The front end was an accordion of crushed metal where it had met the tree. The roof was buckled. The blue paint was almost gone, peeled away by sun and rain, revealing leprous patches of gray primer and orange rust. This was it. The place where Andy died. My stomach turned over. I put a hand against the cold, rough metal of the driver's side door. It didn't budge. Rusted shut. I pulled harder, my muscles straining. Nothing. I went around to the passenger side. Weeds grew thick around it. I kicked them away, pulled the vines off the handle. I braced my foot against the chassis and pulled. The metal groaned in protest. It was stuck fast. I stood back, a surge of frustration rising in me. This was stupid. It was over. A memory of a key meant nothing. As I turned to leave, a gust of wind moved through the junkyard. It whistled through the broken husks of cars around me. It hit my Escort, and the passenger door, the one I had just been pulling on, swung open with a long, piercing shriek of tormented metal. It swung all the way open, as if holding its arm out for me. An invitation. My heart hammered against my ribs. I stood frozen for a long moment, just looking into the dark interior. It was a tomb. It smelled like decay and mildew. I took a breath. I ducked my head and slid inside. The passenger seat was a wreck of cracked vinyl and exposed yellow foam. The dashboard was a spiderweb of cracks. I looked over at the driver's side. At the space where my legs would have been, at the steering wheel bent into a useless crescent. I faced forward. The glove box was still there. The lock was tarnished, but intact. My hand was shaking as I took the key from my pocket. It felt cold. I pushed it into the lock. It was stiff with corrosion. I had to force it. For a second, I thought it would snap. Then, with a loud click that echoed in the small space, the tumblers gave way. The lock turned. I pulled the key out. I took another breath. My fingers found the latch. I pulled it. The glove box door dropped open with a soft thud. Inside, there was no owner's manual. No old maps. No insurance papers. There was just one thing, sitting in the center of the dusty compartment. A cell phone. An old one, a brick of dark gray plastic with a small monochrome screen and a rubber antenna. The screen was cracked. I recognized it. It wasn't mine. It was Andy's. He'd been so proud of it. His parents had just gotten it for him. Why was it here? Why would I hide his phone? My memory of that night was a fog of spinning lights, the sound of the impact, the taste of blood. I remembered panic. I remembered pain. I did not remember taking Andy's phone and locking it in my glove box. It didn't fit. It was a wrong piece. A piece from a different puzzle. I picked it up. It was heavy and solid in my hand, unlike the featherlight things we carry today. Out of some instinct I couldn't name, my thumb found the power button on the side and pressed it. Nothing happened. Of course not. The battery would have been dead for 2 decades. I was about to toss it onto the seat when the cracked screen flickered. A single bar of battery life appeared in the corner. Then the screen lit up with a pale, greenish glow. It opened directly to the last thing used. The video player. A video was paused on the screen. It was a close-up of a face. My face. I held the phone tighter. My knuckles were white. This was it. Proof. Proof of what happened. Proof that it was just a terrible drunken accident. I could see the truth and put this all behind me. My thumb moved to the play button, a small rubber nub in the center of the phone. I pressed it. The video started. The timestamp in the corner read 11:42 p.m. The image was grainy, shaky. It was my face, illuminated by the dashboard lights. I was driving. I was 16. I could hear Andy's voice from behind the phone. Dude, slow down. You're going way too fast. The me on the screen didn't look at him. He kept his eyes on the road. A small, cold smile touched his lips. My lips. Relax, my voice said, but it wasn't my voice. The sound was right, but the tone was all wrong. It was flat, uncaring. I know what I'm doing. No, seriously, Kyle, you're scaring me. Andy's voice was getting higher, tighter. Why? You scared you're going to be late for your playdate with Chubby? The name came out as a sneer. A cruel, deliberate jab. I thought you knew he wasn't real. Or are you still that stupid? I watched, my breath caught in my chest. This wasn't me. This wasn't how I talked to Andy. We were friends. This was the voice of a bully, someone mean. Someone else wearing my skin. Andy's voice, small and pleading from behind the camera. That's not funny, man. What's gotten into you? This isn't you. The me in the video finally turned his head. He wasn't looking at Andy. He was looking directly into the camera lens. He was looking at me, sitting in the wreck of the same car 20 years later. The smile on his face widened. It was a predator's smile. It was triumphant. It was pure evil. He's gone, my own voice said, calm and definitive. He was weak. I pushed him down, locked the door. It's just me now. Then, his eyes still locked on the camera, his hands, my hands, yanked the steering wheel hard to the right. The view on the tiny screen became a blur of motion. I heard Andy scream, a thin, terrified sound cut short. It was followed by a deafening crunch of metal and a sound like a giant fist punching through glass. The screen went black. The only sound left was a faint, high-pitched ringing. The video ended. I dropped the phone. It clattered onto the floor mat. I couldn't breathe. My lungs wouldn't work. The air in the car was gone. I wasn't Kyle. I wasn't the victim. I was the thing that crawled out of the dark. I was the thing that took his place. The me I knew, the me who felt guilt and grief, was just a persona, a mask the monster wore after the kill to blend in. The accident wasn't an accident. The lapse in memory weren't trauma. They were the times the real owner of this body tried to fight back. The voice spoke in my mind. It wasn't the terrified pleading from the bedroom anymore. It was quiet. It was exhausted. It was filled with a bottomless, heartbreaking pity. The voice of the boy I destroyed. Now, do you remember? I looked up. My eyes fell on the rearview mirror, still attached to the shattered windshield. It was cracked down the middle, a dark line bisecting the silvered glass. I stared into it, waiting to see the prisoner again. Waiting to see the terrified eyes of the boy I had usurped. But there was nothing. The mirror reflected the ripped vinyl of the seat behind me. It reflected the dark shape of the trees through the broken rear window. It reflected the empty space where my head should have been. There was no reflection at all. Just a void. Just an empty seat. Where a person was supposed to be. The drive back was a blank space. The engine hummed. The road was a strip of worn asphalt under the sodium lights. My hands were on the wheel at 10 and 2. My foot pressed the accelerator. These were facts. They were movements my body performed without input. The phone was on the passenger seat, its screen dark. A dead thing. A black mirror. The car turned onto my street into my parking spot. The engine cut out. I sat. The key turned in the lock of my apartment door. The door swung inward. The apartment was a wreck. Not the aftermath of a frantic search, but of a slow, creeping neglect. Mail was piled on the floor by the door. A plate with a fossilized crust of something sat on the coffee table. The shard of mirror I had smashed was still on the floor, a glittering mess in the corner. I had done that. Smashed it. I remembered the feeling of the frame in my hands, the impulse to destroy the face I saw. The face of the prisoner. The face of the real Kyle. My body moved to the center of the room and stopped. I stood there, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. There was another sound too, a thin, high-pitched whine deep inside my skull. It wasn't a sound my ears could hear. It was a pressure, a vibration. It was him. The boy I left behind in that twisted metal cage 20 years ago. The one I had locked in the basement of my mind. He was awake. He knew I knew. The game was over. Time ceased to be a line. It was a single point. The wreck, the video, this room. All of it was happening at once. I was the thing that had crawled from the driver's seat, leaving him behind. I was the lie that walked and breathed for 2 decades. The guilt I felt, the sorrow. They weren't mine. They were echoes. Faint signals from the prisoner in the dark, bleeding through the walls I had built around him. His attempts to break free, I had called them panic attacks. His memories, I had called them nightmares. His friend, the one he called Chubby, I had twisted into a monster to frighten him, to keep him small and weak. My hands started to tremble. A single, violent shake. I lowered my gaze to watch it. It was not my command. It was a tremor from the foundation, an earthquake from the dungeon. He was fighting. Pushing against the stone. I balled the hand into a fist, the knuckles white, crushing the motion. My jaw was tight. My teeth ground together. The pressure in my skull intensified. A silent, desperate scream. Then the doorbell rang. The sound cut through the refrigerator hum like a blade. 2 sharp, clean notes. It was an impossible sound. A sound from the outside world. A world that was no longer supposed to exist. I did not move. My whole body was a statue. Don't answer. The thought was not a thought. It was an impulse from the prisoner. A desperate lunge at the controls. Don't let them in. They can't see. Run. Get out. Get help. Tell them who you are. It was a frantic, useless banging against the inside of my own bones. The doorbell rang again. Longer this time. I walked to the door. My legs were steady. My hand was a rock as it closed around the doorknob. The prisoner was screaming, a soundless howl of pure terror that made the muscles in my neck twitch. I ignored it. I turned the knob. I pulled the door open. It was Dave from accounting. He had a file folder in his hand and a worried frown on his face. He looked out of place, like a photograph from a different life pasted onto this one. His eyes flickered from my face to the disaster of the room behind me. Kyle? Hey, you weren't answering your phone. Everyone at the office has been... Well, we were worried. You've been out for 3 days. I manufactured a smile. I could feel the muscles pull at the corners of my mouth. It felt like stretching cold clay. Dave. Hey, sorry, I've been under the weather." The words came out smoothly. A well-oiled machine. Dave's frown deepened. "Under the weather? Man, it looks like a hurricane came through here. Are you okay? You look like you haven't slept in a week." He took a tentative step forward, craning his neck to see more of the apartment. His shoe crunched on a stray shard of glass. He didn't seem to notice. "Just a rough patch," I said. The calm in my own voice was a thing of beauty. A placid lake over a churning abyss. He was fighting me for my own throat, trying to make me choke on the words. A muscle in my cheek jumped. "Come in. Don't mind the mess." No, get him out of here. Don't let him in. He'll get hurt." "Please." I stepped back, holding the door wider. An invitation. Dave hesitated for a second, then stepped inside. His expression, a mixture of pity and concern. He was a good person. A sheep walking into the pen. He set the file folder down on a stack of newspapers. "Look, Kyle, I don't want to bother you if you're sick, but Peterson is having a fit about the quarterly reports." He trailed off, his eyes scanning the room. The smashed photo frames, the overturned lamp. "Seriously, man, what happened in here?" "I told you, a rough patch." My right hand, the one I had balled into a fist, began to tremble again. This time it was more violent, a palsy I couldn't stop. I shoved it into my pocket, hiding it. The prisoner was throwing everything he had at the walls now. He knew what was coming. He could feel my intentions. "Do you want some water?" I asked. My voice was level, almost gentle. Dave nodded, his eyes still wide. "Yeah, thanks. That would be great." I turned and walked toward the kitchen. Each step was deliberate. A general marching to the front line. The prisoner was a frantic buzzing in my head. A swarm of bees trapped in a jar. He was trying to make my legs buckle, trying to make me fall. I would not fall. I had not come this far to fall. The kitchen was a small galley-style room. The counter was cluttered, but the wooden knife block stood there, clean and orderly. A family of blades, nested in their slots. My hand, the steady one, reached out. It passed over the bread knife, the paring knife. My fingers wrapped around the handle of the chef's knife. The handle was smooth, black, and solid. The weight of it was perfect. It felt like an extension of my will. I heard Dave's voice from the living room. "Is this Andy's journal? I didn't know you still had it." I turned from the counter, the knife held low at my side, concealed against my leg. I walked back into the living room. He was standing by the bookshelf, holding a small, leather-bound book. He had found one of the prisoner's relics. A weakness. A chain. I stopped about 10 feet away from him. He looked up, smiling faintly. I remember him talking about this. He was always writing in here. "Put it down," I said. The smile vanished from Dave's face. The tone was wrong. It was flat. It was cold. It was the voice from the video. He looked at me, truly looked at me. For the first time, his eyes dropped from my face, down my body, and saw the hand at my side. He saw the glint of polished steel. His face went pale. The journal slipped from his fingers and hit the floor with a soft thud. "Kyle, what is that?" "He sees. He sees! Run! Dave, run!" The scream in my head was so loud, it made my vision swim for a second. The silent plea was a physical blow. "You see?" I whispered, but the words weren't for Dave. They were for the screaming boy in my skull. "You see what you do? You invite them in. You show them things. You can't just let me be. You always have to try and ruin it." The reversal was complete. In my mind, the prisoner, the real Kyle, was the saboteur. His guilt, his grief, his desperate attempts to connect with the past, they were all attacks. Attacks on the peace I had built. Dave was not a person. He was a tool. A weapon the prisoner had brought into my home to destroy me. Dave took a step back, his hands coming up in a placating gesture. "Okay, man. Okay. Just calm down. Let's put the knife down. We can talk about this." "There's nothing to talk about," I said, and I took a step forward. And then my body locked up. It was as if a switch had been thrown, cutting power to my limbs. My forward momentum ceased. My arm holding the knife froze in mid-swing. An agonizing spasm shot through my entire right side, from my neck down to my ankle. I let out a grunt, a sound torn from my throat. My body was a battlefield. He was making his final stand. He was pouring every last ounce of his will, his 20 years of silent desperation, into this one final act of defiance. My right arm began to convulse. The knife jittered in my grip. The tip of it swung wildly, pointing at Dave, then swinging back in a spastic arc towards my own neck. I could feel his will, his terror, and his rage, a physical force trying to wrench my own muscles from my control. He wanted to end it, to kill the body, to kill the usurper. My will, my cold, clean purpose fought back. I was stronger. I had been in control for 2 decades. What is happening? Dave stammered, his back pressed against the bookshelf. He was watching a man at war with himself, a silent, horrific battle for a single body. I let out another guttural roar, a sound of pure fury mixed with the prisoner's utter despair. The tendons in my neck stood out like cables. Sweat poured down my face. My left hand came up and grabbed my right wrist, trying to steady the knife. My own 2 hands, fighting each other. One trying to plunge the blade into my throat, the other trying to aim it at the man cowering against the wall. The knife shook, the blade a blur between the 2 targets. It was a war of inches. A war for who got to live and who got to die. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The convulsions ceased. The tremor in my arm vanished. The warring pressures in my mind went silent. There was no more screaming, no more frantic buzzing. There was only quiet. A deep, profound, and final quiet. The prisoner's last stand had failed. His final spark had been extinguished. I stood up straight. The movement was fluid. I took a deep, clean breath. My hand holding the knife was perfectly still. I had won. The body was mine. Uncontested. I looked over at Dave. He was still pressed against the bookshelf, his chest heaving, his face a mask of confusion and terror. He saw me stand up straight. He saw the seizure pass. Relief washed over his features. He thought the danger was over. He pushed himself off the bookshelf, taking a hesitant step forward. "Kyle, are you okay?" I looked down at the knife in my hand, its blade clean and bright. Then I looked back at him. A slow, easy smile spread across my lips. It was my smile now. It belonged to me. Everything did. I let my breath out in a quiet sigh of contentment. I am now.